Bullies slap black girl's cheek, unaware she is a deadly martial artist. Ridgewood High was a typical school, filled with the usual hustle and bustle of teenagers, navigating the maze of lockers, classrooms, and lunchrooms. It was a place where cliques formed and broken friendships dotted the landscape of social life. But for Jasmine, a quiet, introspective black girl, the hallways always felt more like a battlefield than a school. Jasmine was used to being an outsider. She wasn't part of any popular group, nor did she strive to be. In fact, she preferred to keep to herself, lost in the world of her textbooks and headphones. Her calm demeanor often earned her the label of the shy girl, but that wasn't the full story. Beneath her composed exterior, there was a sharp mind and a resilient heart that most of her classmates didn't get to see. Jasmine had learned early on to fly under the radar. It was easier that way. Less attention meant fewer chances for the bullies to find her. Still, she couldn't ignore the whispers, the subtle comments, the sideways glances from people who saw her as different. They were there every day, like a quiet hum in the background of her life. At first, it didn't bother her much, but over time, those whispers had grown louder, more hurtful. The jokes, the offhand remarks, the quiet but hurtful remarks about her appearance, her clothes, and, most of all, the color of her skin. As she walked through the crowded hallway, her heart beat a little faster. She could feel the familiar stares on her back, the way her presence seemed to make people uncomfortable. She had learned to ignore it, to pretend like it didn't affect her. But it did. Every single day. Today was no different. Jasmine pulled her hoodie tighter around her and kept her head down, avoiding eye contact with anyone who might try to engage in small talk, or worse, take the opportunity to make a remark. She walked briskly toward her next class, knowing that if she could just make it through the day, she would have another evening of peace at home. But as she passed by the lockers, she spotted a group of boys standing together, laughing and chatting loudly. Among them was Jason, the loudest and most obnoxious of the group. Jasmine knew him well. He had been a source of ridicule since her freshman year. He always seemed to have something to say about her, usually accompanied by the laughter of his friends. Today, though, something about him felt different. He was standing in her path, blocking her way to class. Jason flashed her a smirk, his eyes glinting with the type of superiority that always seemed to go hand in hand with his bullying. He leaned slightly toward her, his voice laced with mockery. "Watch where you're going, Jasmine," he sneered. "Don't want to bump into anyone, do you? It might leave a mark." Jasmine paused, feeling her stomach twist with frustration, but she kept her composure. She wasn't going to let him get under her skin. She wasn't going to let him win. She took a deep breath and tried to walk around him, but before she could, Jason reached out and grabbed her by the arm, yanking her back. "Where do you think you're going, huh?" Jason's grip tightened and his friends snickered behind him. "You don't belong here. You're not one of us." Jasmine felt her pulse race, her body tense. This was it, the moment she had been dreading. But something inside of her snapped. She wasn't going to take this anymore. Jason's smirk widened, and for a moment, Jasmine wondered if she should just walk away and let him have his fun. But something about his words, about the way he treated her, ignited a fire inside her. She wasn't just going to be the girl who let herself be pushed around. She would stand up for herself. Jasmine took a steadying breath, and without warning, she wrenched her arm free from Jason's grasp. She was calm, but there was a steel edge to her movements that caught everyone around her off guard. Her voice, when it came, was clear and controlled, but filled with undeniable strength. "Let go of me, Jason. she said, her eyes locking with his. "You don't get to treat me like this." Jason blinked in surprise, not expecting her to fight back. His grip loosened, and in that moment the power dynamic shifted. Jasmine could feel it. The energy in the air had changed. She wasn't just the victim anymore. She was in control. She stepped back, ready to move on, but she knew Jason wouldn't let it go that easily. This wasn't the end. It was just the beginning, and Jasmine was ready for whatever came next. The next few days after the incident with Jason were strangely quiet for Jasmine. It wasn't that she hadn't noticed the subtle shift in the way people looked at her, but the silence felt almost heavier than the usual taunts. It was as though the entire school was waiting for something, waiting to see if she would back down, or worse, if the bullying would escalate. Jasmine had expected some sort of retaliation from Jason, but when nothing came, she couldn't help but feel both relieved and wary. The hallway seemed quieter now when she walked through it, as if the students were almost afraid to look at her directly. Even the whispers, though still present, had diminished. Jason and his group of friends kept their distance, and for the first time in a long time, Jasmine felt like she had a sense of space that was her own. But then, at lunch the following Monday, she saw it. Jason standing with a different group of boys, glaring at her from across the cafeteria. His eyes were filled with something she hadn't seen before. Anger, resentment, maybe even fear. He was the kind of person who thrived on control, and Jasmine's defiance had thrown him off balance. He couldn't stand the idea that she had stood up to him. Jasmine's heart raced for a moment. She had expected him to lash out, but now she realized that his silence might be worse. It left her wondering what he would do next, what he might have planned. She wasn't going to be intimidated, though. The last few days had taught her that standing tall was more important than retreating into fear. At the same time, she felt a strange solidarity from her classmates. The whispers were no longer derogatory. They were more curious. People who once ignored her now exchanged polite smiles, and some even nodded in recognition. It wasn't the overwhelming support that she had hoped for, but it was enough to give her a sense of belonging. She wasn't invisible anymore. Tyrell, her best friend, was the one person who had consistently stood by her through everything. He had been the first to congratulate her after the incident with Jason, and he continued to support her as things began to settle down. He could see the change in her, just as she could feel it. Jasmine was no longer that quiet girl who kept her head down. She was starting to take control, to take up space. As she walked past Jason's table, she held her head high, ignoring his cold stare. The silence was thick in the air between them, but Jasmine didn't look back. She was ready for whatever came next, because now she knew something important. She had the power to control her own narrative. The bell rang, signaling the end of lunch, and the students started to file out of the cafeteria. Jasmine walked out with Tyrell, feeling stronger than she had before, but she also knew that Jason wouldn't let things lie for long. The tension was far from over. Her journey was just beginning. Jasmine's life had settled into a quiet rhythm after the confrontation with Jason, but deep down she knew it wasn't over. Jason's bullying had always been part of a bigger problem, a culture at Ridgewood High where certain students felt entitled to exert their power over others. Jasmine had become the focal point of that struggle, and though things had calmed down in the days following the hallway incident, the storm was far from finished. The rumors about what had happened in the hallway spread like wildfire. People whispered, but not in the way they used to. The whispers were now filled with curiosity, some with admiration. Jasmine had stood up to Jason, something no one had ever done before. But there was also a subtle shift in the atmosphere. Jason's friends had started to avoid her, and some of the girls who had previously made fun of her started giving her weird looks. They didn't know how to handle her now that she wasn't the easy target they once thought she was. Then, one Friday afternoon, everything came to a head. Jasmine was walking home from school when she saw Jason again, this time in a different setting. He was sitting on a bench outside the local convenience store, surrounded by a few of his friends. There was a familiar sneer on his face as he saw her approach, and for a moment it felt like the air itself was thick with tension. Jason stood up as she neared, blocking her path. His friends stood behind him, watching with bated breath. Jasmine's heart raced for a moment, but she reminded herself that she had dealt with this before. She wasn't going to let him intimidate her again. "Hey, Jasmine," Jason said, his voice dripping with false sweetness. "Still acting all tough, huh? You think you can just walk around like nothing happened?" Jasmine took a deep breath, holding her ground. She wasn't scared anymore. "What do you want, Jason?" she asked calmly, trying to mask the tension that was starting to build. Jason smirked, stepping closer to her, his friends snickering behind him. "I just wanted to remind you who's in charge around here. You really think you can stand up to me? You're nothing but a black girl in a school full of people who don't care about you." The words cut deeper than Jasmine wanted to admit. She had heard them before, but hearing them from Jason in this moment stung more than she expected. It was like he was trying to break her down all over again. But this time, Jasmine wouldn't let him. "You don't get to say that to me," she replied, her voice steady. "I'm not afraid of you." Jason's expression faltered for a moment, and his friends, sensing the shift in the atmosphere, grew quiet. Jasmine's words had caught him off guard. He had expected her to back down, to shrink under his words. But she stood tall, unyielding. "Go ahead, Jason," she said. "Try me again." For a moment, there was silence. Jason's friends shifted uneasily, unsure of what to do. Jasmine could see the doubt in their eyes. They had watched Jason bully others for so long, but they had never seen him challenged like this. He wasn't the untouchable king of the school anymore. Jason hesitated. He opened his mouth to say something but closed it, his pride swallowing the words. He glared at Jasmine one last time before backing away, his friends trailing behind him. The confrontation ended not with a physical fight, but with something more powerful. Jasmine's refusal to shrink, to be the victim in his story. As she watched Jason and his friends walk off, a quiet sense of triumph washed over her. She had stood her ground, and in doing so, she had taken back her power. She wasn't the same girl who had walked into Ridgewood High a year ago. She had learned the strength it took to stand tall, to face adversity head-on, and to walk away with her head held high. But as Jasmine turned to leave, she knew that this was only the beginning. The battle was not over. It never would be. But now Jasmine was ready to face whatever came next, because she knew she had the power to overcome it. The next week passed without incident, and for a moment, it seemed like the tension from the confrontation with Jason had finally dissipated. But that sense of calm was fleeting. Jasmine couldn't shake the feeling that something was simmering beneath the surface. Jason had backed off, but that didn't mean he had forgotten. She could sense the way he watched her from across the hall, his friends glancing nervously in her direction. It was like they were all waiting for the other shoe to drop. It wasn't long before she found out what that shoe was. One afternoon, as Jasmine was sitting in the cafeteria with Terrell, she saw Jason walk into the lunchroom with a group of his friends. She had grown used to him being around, but today, something felt different. There was an air of quiet hostility around him, a sense that he was planning something. Jasmine turned her attention back to her lunch, but she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. Then, as if on cue, she heard a familiar voice from behind her. "Jasmine!" She turned around to see one of her classmates, Amber, standing there. Amber was someone Jasmine had never really spoken to, but they had crossed paths a few times in the hallway. She was a popular girl, someone who was always surrounded by her group of friends. Jasmine hadn't expected her to be the one to approach her. "Hey, Amber," Jasmine said, unsure of what was going on. Amber hesitated, glancing over her shoulder at Jason and his friends. "I just wanted to say I'm sorry for what happened last week. You didn't deserve that." Jasmine blinked, surprised by the apology. Amber wasn't the type to apologize to anyone, let alone someone like Jasmine. She wasn't sure how to respond, but she simply nodded, appreciating the gesture. "Thanks," Jasmine said softly, her voice genuine. "It means a lot." Amber took a deep breath as if preparing to say something else. "And I don't know if you've noticed, but Jason's been spreading rumors about you, saying that you're the problem, that you made everything worse. And he's been going around telling people that you're just looking for attention." Jasmine's heart sank. She had known that Jason would try to spin the situation in his favor, but hearing it from Amber made it feel more real. It was one thing for Jasmine to stand up for herself, but it was another thing entirely when someone else tried to manipulate the narrative. Amber seemed to sense the frustration building in Jasmine. "Look, I know it's not much, but I just wanted to let you know that not everyone thinks that way. Some of us see what really happened. And I've been telling people that Jason's a jerk for the way he treated you." Jasmine was taken aback. She hadn't expected someone like Amber to take her side. Amber wasn't exactly the type to get involved in other people's drama, but here she was, standing up to Jason on Jasmine's behalf. "Thanks, Amber," Jasmine said, her voice softer now. "I appreciate it." Amber gave her a small smile before turning to leave, but just as she walked away, she looked over her shoulder one last time. "I don't know if you'll believe me, but I think Jason's scared of you." Jasmine watched her go, still trying to process everything. She had stood up to Jason once, but now, with Amber's unexpected support, she realized that maybe this battle wasn't just about her. It was about everyone who had ever been pushed around, dismissed, or silenced. Amber's words had confirmed what Jasmine had known deep down. Standing up for herself had started a chain reaction. Jason wasn't just backing off because of her. He was backing off because other people were beginning to see the truth too. As the rest of the lunch period went on, Jasmine sat back, feeling a newfound sense of purpose. She wasn't alone in this anymore. The tide was turning, and it wasn't just about fighting back against one bully. It was about changing the culture, about showing others that it was okay to stand up, to speak out, and to be unapologetically yourself. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew one thing for sure: Jasmine was ready to keep fighting for what was right. The final days of school were upon Jasmine, and as she walked through the familiar hallways of Ridgewood High, she couldn't help but feel a deep sense of change. Everything felt different now. The way people looked at her, the way she carried herself. the way her classmates treated her. She had fought for her place in the world, and now that fight had given her a voice that demanded respect, a voice that couldn't be ignored. The tension with Jason had finally simmered down. The days of being bullied and belittled by him and his friends were behind her. Jason, once the king of the school's social hierarchy, had shrunk into the background, his bravado shattered. Jasmine had never expected to see the day when he would back off, but she knew it was because he had been forced to face someone stronger than he could ever have imagined. But it wasn't just the victory over Jason that had changed her. It was the support she had gained from unexpected sources. Amber, once an unlikely ally, had spoken up for Jasmine when it mattered most. And in doing so, Amber had shown Jasmine that true change wasn't about winning every battle. It was about finding allies who shared your values, who stood by you when you needed it most. That's what Jasmine had gained over the past few weeks. Not just respect, but the realization that she wasn't alone in this fight. As the school bell rang, signaling the end of the last class, Jasmine stood in front of her locker, her thoughts a swirl of emotions. She was proud of herself, but there was still a part of her that was processing everything that had happened. The journey had been long, but now it was time to move on. There was so much more to accomplish, so much more to prove, but the foundation had been laid. Walking out into the bright sunlight for the last time as a student at Ridgewood High, Jasmine felt the weight of the years of struggle lift off her shoulders. She had earned her place here, in this world, and she wasn't going to let anyone take that away from her. Tyrell was waiting for her by the gates, a broad grin on his face. "Hey, you ready to leave this place behind?" he asked, nudging her playfully. Jasmine laughed, the sound light and carefree. "More than ready," she replied. "I'm ready for the next chapter." As they walked toward the bus stop, Jasmine couldn't help but reflect on how far she had come. She had stood up to bullies, faced adversity head-on, and fought for her right to be seen and heard. But more importantly, she had learned to fight for herself, to trust in her own strength, and to never apologize for who she was. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, she was excited to find out. The story of Jasmine's courage wasn't just about one girl standing up to a bully. It was about the quiet strength that lies within all of us, waiting to be awakened. It was about the power of unity, of standing together against hate, and of finding our voices in the face of adversity. And as Jasmine walked off into the sunset, her heart filled with hope and possibility, she knew that her journey had only just begun.